Welcome to this presentation. It's all about speeches and how to make them well. I'm Justin Rempel. So there are many times in your life when you are probably going to be asked to or have the opportunity to make a speech. It is an incredibly useful life skill to have. Some of these events are going to be personal events where you'll have the opportunity to speak at things like weddings or funerals. Sometimes, depending on what job you get, you will be asked to make a presentation or a speech for your business or your line of work. And this is one of the reasons why we practice when we are in school, because it's a life skill that comes up from time to time, and it's useful to know how to do it well. Even if it's not a formal setting, knowing how to speak well and present well is an excellent communication tool that you might need even if you're just trying to communicate information or tell a story from yourself to another person or a small group of people. It's a valuable form of expression. That being said, it is commonly recorded in the research that public speaking is one of the most common fears for people, including grown adults. So it's a good thing to take a look at and to practice and to know more about so that we can get better at overcoming our fears and our hesitancies and presenting well to other people. So when we talk about making a speech or giving a speech, we're actually referring to a few different styles. That can be a range of things. For example, there are some cases where people make an improvised speech. That means that they are making it up completely off the top of their head. They have nothing prepared in advance. Perhaps they've been called upon on short notice or put on the spot, and they're going in cold turkey. That means without preparation. This is probably the most challenging way to make a speech, and most people would certainly prefer to avoid it. But with a lot of practice, you can get to the point where you're capable enough speaking and presenting in front of other people to do a successful improvised speech. Sometimes speeches are memorized. So this means that people have written them down in advance and they've carefully gone over everything that they want to say, and they've stored it in their memory, in their mind, so that when the time comes to give a speech, they're able to deliver it without any supporting tools, no notes, no papers, no slideshow behind them, just the words that they've stored in their memory, in their mind. This is an impressive skill that takes practice as well, and so most people don't start here. Usually when people give speeches, especially if they're beginning, learning, practicing how to make good speeches, those speeches are supported. So that means people go in with a script, a paper in their hands, like this person in the picture, or they have note cards that they're referring to. Note cards are not the full script written out word for word. They're just point form, the basic points that people want to talk about. Or they have some kind of presentation like a slideshow going on behind them that they're referring to, looking over their shoulder to the screen perhaps or to the board and referring to the points or the script that's on that screen. Usually this is the kind of speech that people start with because it helps to guide their speaking. So when we think about how to structure a speech, we have to start with the opening. And the opening has two purposes, really. It needs to introduce the speaker and the main ideas. So it's a good idea to say your name and the topic that you're going to be speaking on. You should present yourself as a friendly but informed person. The second purpose, though, is to engage the audience, which means to generate interest, to draw them into what you're saying. So that means if you're thinking about trying to gain interest from your audience, you might want to start your speech with something like a joke. It's a good idea to get people laughing. Maybe you tell an anecdote, which is a short story that draws people in and gets them curious about your topic and what you have to say. Or maybe you share a really interesting fact, a piece of trivia or a statistic that might really surprise people or get them thinking in new, curious ways. The middle or the body of our speech is where all of the important information lies, the main ideas and things that we want to say. So this is where organization is really important, and this is why we need to plan and practice in advance. We need to have clear organization. The order of information should make sense. We introduce the first things first, the most basic things first, the definitions first, and then we build on those to more complex ideas, and we build towards our big point or thesis, the argument that we're making. It can be really helpful to create a list to structure or order our information in the preparation and planning phases. And because we are speaking and people are hearing all of our ideas and points, it's a good idea to state really clearly and explicitly when we are introducing each new point. For example, it might sound something like this. The second thing I want to say, or point number 2. These are clear spoken indicators to our audience that we're moving from point 1 to point 2. And it's a helpful cue for them to move mentally with us through our organized structure. We need to make sure in the planning and preparation phases that we're covering all important points, all the things that we want to say are being covered. We don't want to be in the middle of our speech and realize that we've forgotten something or left something out and start to go off on tangents. Oh yeah, I meant to say this. That does not look good. It's important to keep things simple, brief, and engaging. We want to have a lot of focus, keeping things to the point so that we're not rambling or going off on side tangents. It's a good idea to know what time frame you have to work with. A lot of speeches, whether it's assigned for schoolwork, whether it's for an event in your life, whether it's for your job, have some kind of time frame to fit into the meeting or event or class. So know how much time you have to work with and prepare your speech accordingly. As you're going through your main points, you want to communicate the information, but you also want to keep things interesting. So definitely throw in humor or storytelling, especially if it's on topic. When we reach the ending of our speech, we need to give a satisfying conclusion, which means we need to wrap everything up. We should summarize our main points, restate the main takeaway ideas for your audience, and it's a good idea to give them next steps. Here's what you can do with this information. Here's how it applies to your life moving forward. It's always nice to end with a look forward to the future, ending with a hopeful note. Sometimes you might want to end with a memorable line or a joke or a story. The audience often remembers the very last thing that you say. This is called the recency effect. So end on a strong note. When you're making a speech, these are the things to think about. Practice, 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 especially as you're learning the skills. Practice in front of the mirror, practice in front of your friends or test audiences. Practice so that you can time it out properly for your time frame that you're given, and practice so that you can work on all the skills we're going to cover on this slide. One thing I want to mention is pace. One of the main mistakes that people make when they start public speaking is they rush. They talk very, very quickly. And that has to do with anxiety. They're usually nervous. So you should talk in your speech slower than you think. It might sound a little silly or foolish to your ear, It might sound like you're talking down to people a little bit because you are talking really, really slowly by your standards, but slow speaking is actually clear communication, and it gives the audience time to take in what you're saying and start to process, internalize, and memorize the information that you're giving them. Clarity is super important. You need to pronounce each word clearly and correctly. When you are practicing your speech, highlight or take note of words, sentences, phrases that are difficult for you to pronounce clearly, and work on those words, phrases, sentences, or change and restructure to make it easier for yourself. Volume should be loud enough so everyone can hear you. This is going to be different depending on if you're recording a speech, if you're standing in a small area, if you're presenting to one person, or if you're in a large room presenting to a lot of people. The tone is really important. You need to be friendly, come across as an approachable person that people want to hear from and learn from. And you should be expressive, which means that you have variety in your tone. You want to avoid monotony. If you are speaking in a monotonous fashion, that means one tone, just very, very flat the whole time. Sometimes people do this when they're nervous as well. They just talk the same way without ever varying their tone. And the problem with that, other than sounding robotic and inhuman, is that it gets very boring very quickly. Projection is important, especially if you're in large spaces, that your voice is resonant and it's carrying to the back of the room so that even the people sitting in the back can hear you. Pauses should be used sparingly. It does not sound good if you are pausing often. Too many pauses make for a stilted and broken speech, but pauses should be used for emphasis in between sections or after key points. Take a beat, wait for a moment, let your point sink in. Let the audience think about what you just said, and then move on. It's going to be great for their memory retention, for remembering the important points that you made. Also pause for clarity. It's all about clear communication. You should minimize fillers. The technical term is vocalized disfluencies. These are things like that we like to insert in between words, phrases, sentences. It's not reasonable to expect that you're going to have 0 of these or none of these. You are going to use them sometimes. It only becomes a problem when you're using them so much that it starts to break up and disrupt and take away from the meaning and the impact of your speech. So try to reduce the amount of time that you're using these. Body language is important. Your body is a part of your expression. So be open and expressive with your body. Same with your face. It should communicate the points that you're making. It should communicate the feelings that you want the audience to feel. Excited, interested, curious, those sorts of things. And hand gestures are very useful as well. Use them to emphasize your points and support your meaning. Sometimes you need to tone it down if it's too much or they're becoming too distracting, so they're taking away from the speech that you're making. These are all good things to consider when you're preparing and planning for your speaking. And as you practice and make more and more speeches throughout your life, you will get better and better at all of these things. If you do this often enough, you will get to the point where you can get off script and you will be able to make memorized or even improvised speeches. The last thing I will say is, especially if you have a script at the start and you're working with it, do your best to come up off of that script with your face and make some eye contact with your audience throughout your speech. When you look at your script or your notes or the screen the whole time, that means you're not looking at your audience, and then they'll start to feel disengaged or taken out of the speech.